15 minutes to do a presentation on what we're doing in GARP, so to talk about kind of public health-driven, not-for-profit drug development, how we work with the private and public sector as a partnership. So my name is Manica Balasegaram. I'm actually the director of GARP. There's a few of my colleagues here in the audience, I think. And I'll try to do a quick run through of what we're doing, hopefully some time for questions. So who are we? We are a not-for-profit organization that was set up in May 2016 by the WHO and the Drugs for Neglected Diseases Initiative, and we're currently incubated in the Drugs for Neglected Diseases Initiative. We have a focus on, obviously on AMR, but particularly drug-resistant bacterial infections where there are inadequate treatments. But also we address global health priorities and really try to reflect the realities of clinical practice on the ground. We have developed 4 priorities, which I will talk about a little bit later. These are 4 programs that we are working in. And our objectives in our first period of our business plan, which is a 7-year period up to 2023, is really to develop 4 new treatments, either by improving the use of existing antibiotics or accelerating the development of new chemical entities, new antibiotics. One very important aspect of what we do, obviously, is to also ensure appropriate use and access, and I will touch on that a bit later. In terms of our scientific and R&D strategy, we have a short, medium, and long-term approach, and this isn't terribly complex, obviously. But what we try and do is, first of all, on the short to medium term, we're really focusing on optimizing the use of antibiotics, either by improving dosing, duration, formulation, drug repurposing, and potentially combinations. But also on accelerating, restarting, and recovering the development of other new or abandoned drug candidates that address public health priorities. So those are really the 2 things we're focusing on. And of course, in the medium to long term, one thing that we can really do some work to support, including working with other initiatives, is to see how we can have added value in more upstream approaches. And one component of that I will mention is also on an educational program. What we essentially are is a de-risking and de-linking model, and we do this obviously with the perspective of selecting and executing R&D programs based on WHO priorities with partners. And what we try to do is really to absorb significant development risks and therefore change the risk profile of a development project for the partner, usually a private sector partner. And we effectively also try to de-link revenues generated from new treatments from sales. This is obviously an important ambition, I think, for all R&D initiatives working in AMR. But I think what is also very important is we also need to look at accessibility and affordability while negotiating appropriate margins with our partners. And obviously what we also try to ensure is that our private sector partners have a future as antibiotic drug developers. And I think this is an important balance that we need to strike. But obviously embedded within that is looking at stewardship, and this is something that we actually work on within the contracts that we make with our partners. In terms of a very quick snapshot, this is a terribly complicated diagram. I'll try and explain this very quickly. In the center circle is what we have in-house within GARP. And I think by the end of this year we're probably going to be about a core staff of 40, so that will probably be really the number of staff that will really be active over the course of our business plan. And what we have is some in-house scientific R&D capacity and experience and product know-how, so usually people from the private but also some from the not-for-profit sector, and also people with public health backgrounds. And obviously then we work with a range of different partners, governments, pharma, biotech, research institutions, civil society and academia, and often within the scope of one project, R&D project, we can have all different partners involved. And in terms of the way we work, we try to prioritize public health needs. We take an end-to-end approach, which means that wherever we start, such as in clinical development, such as phase 1 or phase 2, we are committed towards going all the way to the end of the program to registration and access. We work with WHO to develop target product profiles and scientific roadmaps, which we publish. And within these target product profiles and roadmaps, we embed appropriate use and access. And what we also do, 2 important aspects of how we work, is we are willing to act as a sponsor, including for clinical trials, but also we are willing to work with our partners to also in and out license technologies as well. So this is just run through this very quickly in terms of how we develop our priorities. We obviously follow the WHO priority pathogen list, but two other aspects that we look at are populations and also on diseases and syndromes. So this has helped us to work through our initial R&D programs, and this has been done with WHO as well as through external consultation. So our 4 programs are really, there are 3 really, I would say, largely clinical programs, and 1 program that is what we call transversal. So the clinical programs are really focused on neonatal and pediatric antibiotic drug development. And the 3rd clinical program is focused around STIs, and this is probably, I would say, the biggest and our main program. And what we're trying to do here is really accelerate the development of a new drug that will be focused on drug-resistant gonorrhea. We are trying to also take a portfolio approach, so the idea is that we won't necessarily just focus on one drug, but potentially on a portfolio of drug candidates in the future. We also have a memory recovery and exploratory program, and here it's really to work on reviving old knowledge, abandoned projects, and some of these projects may be more early stage, so they more be preclinical projects, depending on where these projects have been abandoned in the past. So this is really, as I said, transversal, and at the moment we're really looking for projects that, for instance, that can feed into, say, our STI program. But actually, in fact, we're also looking at prioritizing gram-negative projects. In terms of our approach to access and stewardship, we try to create a favorable environment with both the public and private partners. And what we try and look at in terms of access is incorporating access components, starting into our R&D roadmaps and target product profiles, including aspirations on final price of the product, but also obviously therefore things like cost of goods. As I said, we really try and bring together the different partners and really play to their strength. And this could be also small pharma, could be academia, could be generics as well. We do have to work on a sustainable and I would say fair pricing that allows equity and will not necessarily create incentives that will push for I would say overuse. But at the same time, we need to look at the partners we work with and look at see how these companies can look at a revenue for when they are bringing the product in the market. And obviously, I think this ties in also with a broader discussion on pull incentives that I think also needs to happen in parallel. In terms of the contractual provisions we make with partners, we do look at certain aspects that include, for instance, obviously quality and manufacturing requirements. We obviously work and agree on regulatory strategies, trying to prioritize countries where we see early rollout being essential. This obviously needs to be based on hopefully what we see as surveillance data. But we also need to look at certain aspects on where this product will be released, whether it's in the public and private sector, and how it will be made available within countries. And as mentioned, some of these aspects that we also need to think about now are things such as environmental and waste management of antibiotics. So this is actually something that we could put into actual contractual provisions with, say, a sub-licensee who can be a manufacturer for products that we develop. In terms of monitoring and evaluation, one of the things that we will need to take on in the future is monitoring and evaluation, including on provisions we've made in terms of contracts with partners. So that's going to be a fairly important piece in the future as well. And I think we obviously work on, and this is an important aspect, we're not going to be just bringing the drugs onto the market. The idea is not just to do the trials or get to registration. What we have to look at is what we call the public health pathway that really looks at how we can ensure best use of the drugs in terms of generating evidence-based guidelines for policy change and appropriate use and uptake. And so sometimes in some of our R&D projects that we're looking at, in fact, a significant part of the investment we need to make are actually going to be happening on trials that are going to be happening after registration. And that's actually quite important if we want to think about antibiotic stewardship in the future. And I think as some of you are probably aware, one of the big tasks also here will be to collect additional safety data as well. And some of the antibiotics that we may bring onto the market will be registered with relatively small data sets. And so we do need to think about safety of these antibiotics, particularly if we want to think about how they're deployed in resource-limited settings. This slide just gives a very quick example of how we look at, how we apply some of these principles into practice. And I've just taken the example of what we have in one of our programs, where we have a partnership with a small company, but also a few academic groups to develop an antibiotic for gonorrhea, in fact. What we're trying to do is obviously, first of all, we start on the principle of utilizing surveillance data to help us determine our R&D needs, the access needs, the priorities, our regulatory strategy, and so on. And here we work very closely with WHO and GASP, which is the gonococcal antimicrobial surveillance program, to really feed into this part. One of the important aspects of what we are doing is trying to also limit the development for STIs and focus development for STIs. So try to also exclude development for other community infections. And so therefore, automatically, when we bring the drug into the market, to significantly reduce use for a narrow indication. We also look at how we can work on licensing. So one of the aspects of the agreement we've made is that we will get a license for 168 countries once we register the drug with the FDA. And then what we will work on is sub-licensing conditions, including quality, manufacturing, environmental standards, and so on. And in fact, some of the funders of GARP have actually put in requirements in our contracts on these issues, so it's something that we are actually obliged to work on subsequently with our partners. As I mentioned, we're already working on a plan to which other countries we need to prioritize registration based on surveillance data. We have a very active program in this SDI program on CMC, on chemistry, manufacturing and control, and that's largely to work on an adapted formulation that will be heat stable but also affordable. We also are working on a parallel track that will come in parallel and subsequent to registration, which is all the additional public health studies we need to do to conduct policy and use. And so I can obviously go on, but I think this is just to give you a flavor of what we're actually doing to apply some of the aspects that we talk about in terms of our access principles. So I think obviously I will just end by having one or two slides on just some of the key challenges. Obviously I think there's a lot going on in the R&D space. There has been some very exciting announcements in the last few days on funding for R&D. And I think broadly speaking, we all accept that there really needs to be focus on three areas. Basic research, drug discovery, and I think that goes into drug translational research, and I think there is now a significant increase in funding in this area. Two other aspects that I would highlight that I think are important is optimization of existing antibiotics, but also clinical development, which is actually the fairly expensive stage of R&D, and I think there needs to be obviously resources for this. I think there's been a lot of discussion on incentives, so I won't go too much on this. So I think just in order, because I think my time is running, I think where we are now in terms of where we are at the moment is just to say that we're currently in the process of starting and implementing some of our R&D programs, but we're also in the process of continuing to raise funds for our long-term business plans, a 7-year business plan, and that's a period of 7 years. And I mentioned that's global budget we estimate of around 270 million. So this is still a work in progress. And I would just like to end by thanking all our supporters who've really made GARP a possibility. Thank you.